Chapter 1. The hanging tree rope creaked in the wind like a broken lullaby. Alara stood at the edge of the square, her small body trembling, her voice hoarse from screaming. The crowd had thinned now that the spectacle was over, leaving only the lingering smell of torch smoke and fear. Her mother hung from the ancient oak at the center of the village, her body swaying gently, her face turned away as if she couldn't bear to look down at her daughter one last time. They said she was a witch. They said she'd poisoned the magistrate's daughter with herbs, and whispered curses. They said she deserved to burn, but the rope had been cheaper. Alara didn't believe any of it. Her mother had been a healer, nothing more. She'd saved the baker's son from fever. She'd helped the blacksmith's wife through a difficult birth. But when the magistrate's daughter fell ill when no physician could cure her, they needed someone to blame, and her mother had been alone, widowed, poor, easy. "Mama," Alara whispered, her voice breaking. She was only 8 years old, but she understood finality. She understood that no one was coming to cut her mother down. No one was coming to tell her it was a mistake. The square was empty now, except for the guards stationed at the corners, their faces blank and bored. One of them noticed her still standing there, and shouted something harsh. Waving his hand as if shooing away a stray dog, Alara didn't move. She couldn't. Her mother's shawl, the one she'd woven herself from blue wool, fluttered in the breeze. Alara wanted to climb the tree and pull her down. She wanted to wrap her arms around her and beg her to wake up, but her legs wouldn't move. Her body had gone cold and hollow, like something had been scooped out of her chest and thrown into the river. "Please," she whispered to no one. To the wind, to God, to anyone who might be listening. "Please save her." The guard started walking toward her, his hand on the hilt of his sword, and then the temperature dropped. It happened so suddenly that Alara gasped, her breath misting in the air. The torches along the square flickered and dimmed, their flames shrinking as if something had sucked the warmth from the world. The guard stopped mid-step, his eyes widening. A figure stepped out of the shadows beneath the colonnade. He was tall, impossibly tall, and dressed in black that seemed to drink in the remaining light. His coat was long and severe, buttoned to the throat, and his hair was dark as ink, falling just past his shoulders. But it was his face that made Alara's heart stutter. Beautiful, terrible, ageless. His skin was pale as moonlight, his features sharp and aristocratic. But his eyes were the color of blood in low light, deep crimson flecked with gold. They swept across the square with the cold precision of a predator assessing prey. The guard stumbled backward, his sword half drawn. Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He walked forward with a grace that didn't seem entirely human, each step deliberate and soundless. When he stopped, he stood directly beneath the hanging tree, looking up at Alara's mother with an expression that might have been curiosity or pity. It was hard to tell. "She's dead," the guard said, his voice shaking. "Now, it's over. Move along." The stranger tilted his head slightly, as if the guard were an insect buzzing too close. Then he turned his gaze to Alara, her breath caught. Those eyes, those impossible, ancient eyes, looked straight through her. She felt pinned in place, unable to look away, unable to move. There was no warmth in them, no kindness. But there was something else, something old and patient, and far too knowing. "You called for help," he said softly. His voice was low and smooth, like velvet dragged over stone. It wasn't loud, but it carried across the square as if the world itself had gone silent to listen. Alara's throat tightened. She nodded barely. The stranger studied her for a long moment, then looked back up at her mother's body. "She's beyond saving." "No," the word tore out of Alara before she could stop it. "Please, you have to. She's dead, child." His tone wasn't cruel, but it was absolute, final. Her heart stopped before the rope even tightened. "There's nothing left to save." Alara's knees buckled. She hit the cobblestones hard, her hands scraping against the rough stone. A sob wrenched from her chest, raw and broken. The guard took a step forward, emboldened now. "I said, move along, stranger. This is crown business." The man in black turned his head slowly, and the guard froze. "Crown business," the stranger repeated, his voice soft and deadly. How quaint. He moved. Alara didn't even see it happen. One moment he was standing beneath the tree. The next, he was in front of the guard, one pale hand wrapped around the man's throat. The guard made a choking sound, his sword clattering to the ground. "Do you know what I am?" the stranger asked quietly. The guard's face had gone white. He shook his head frantically. "No?" The stranger smiled, and Alara saw the flash of something sharp. fangs, long and white and impossibly sharp. Perhaps you should have asked before you pointed steel at me. He released the guard, who collapsed to his knees, gasping. The other guards had fled. Elara could hear their boots echoing down the alleyways, retreating into the safety of distance. The stranger turned back to her. Elara should have run. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to hide, to get away from this creature who wasn't human. But she didn't. She stayed on her knees, her hands pressed against the cold stones, and looked up at him. Please, she whispered again. His expression shifted just slightly. Something flickered behind those crimson eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. He crouched down in front of her, bringing himself to her level. Up close, she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way his skin seemed too smooth to flawless. He smelled like winter nights and old parchment. Why do you beg a monster for mercy? He asked softly. Elara's voice was barely audible. Because no one else will help me. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he stood, his coat sweeping around him like wings. Come with me, he said. Where? Away from here. He glanced at the hanging tree, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Before they decide you're a witch too. Elara looked back at her mother one last time. The shawl fluttered again, blue against the dark sky. Then she stood, her legs shaking, and followed the vampire into the night. Chapter 2. The House of Shadows. They walked through streets Elara had known her entire life, but everything looked different now. The familiar shops and houses seemed to lean away from them, as if the buildings themselves knew what walked among them. The vampire moved with fluid certainty, never hesitating at crossroads, never looking back to see if she followed. She did. She had nowhere else to go. Her feet ached. Her dress was still damp from where she'd knelt in the square. Every few steps, she glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see the magistrate's men coming after her with more rope. But the streets remained empty. Even the usual night sounds, dogs barking, shutters closing, drunk men stumbling home had gone silent. They won't follow, the vampire said without turning around. They're too afraid. Of you? Of what I represent. He turned down an alley so narrow she had to walk sideways to follow. Your village sits on the border of House Constantine's territory. They know our laws. They know what happens when mortals harm those under our protection. But my mother wasn't, she is now. His voice was flat, final. The dead belong to us. That's the oldest law. Elara didn't understand, but she was too exhausted to ask. Her mind kept circling back to the image of her mother hanging from that tree, the blue shawl, the way the rope had creaked. She stumbled over a loose cobblestone and caught herself against the wall. The vampire stopped. He turned to look at her, his crimson eyes reflecting what little moonlight filtered into the alley. For the first time, she saw something that might have been consideration in his expression. How old are you? 8. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Almost 9. He was silent for a long moment. Then he shrugged off his coat and held it out to her. You're shivering. She was. She hadn't noticed until he said it, but her whole body was shaking from cold, from shock, from the weight of everything that had happened. She took the coat with trembling hands. It was far too large, the hem dragging on the ground, but it was warm. Impossibly warm for something that had been wrapped around a dead man's shoulders. You're not dead, she said suddenly. One dark eyebrow rose. Perceptive. But you're not alive either. Also perceptive. He turned and continued walking. We're something in between. It's complicated. They emerged from the alley onto a road Elara had never traveled. It led away from the village, into the hills where the old forest began. The trees here were ancient and twisted, their branches forming a canopy so thick that even moonlight struggled to penetrate. The vampire walked into that darkness without hesitation. Elara followed, clutching his coat around her shoulders. After what felt like hours, but might have been only minutes, the trees opened up to reveal a structure that made her stop in her tracks. It wasn't a castle, not exactly. It was too organic for that, as if it had grown from the hillside rather than been built upon it. Stone and wood twisted together in impossible angles, forming towers and terraces that seemed to defy gravity. Windows glowed with dim amber light, but there was something wrong about it. The light didn't flicker like candles or lanterns. It was steady and cold and strangely hypnotic. This is House Constantine, the vampire said. My home. Elara searched for words. It's not what I expected. What did you expect? A crypt, coffins, and cobwebs. There was a hint of dark amusement in his voice. We're not savages, child. We simply have different needs than the living. He led her up a path of smooth black stones that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. As they approached the entrance, a massive door carved with symbols she didn't recognize it swung open on silent hinges. The interior was even stranger than the exterior. The entrance hall was vast and circular, with a domed ceiling that seemed to stretch up into infinity. More of that cold amber light emanated from sconces shaped like thorns. The walls were lined with portraits, hundreds of them, all depicting pale, beautiful people with knowing eyes. Are they all? Elara couldn't finish the question. Vampires? Yes, members of my house, past and present. He gestured to a portrait near the door, a woman with silver hair and fierce eyes. My sister, Katerina. She died in the purge of 16-3. Another gesture, this time to a young man with a sardonic smile. My cousin, Mikhail. He walked into the sun 50 years ago. Depression. I'm sorry. He looked at her with something that might have been surprise. Why? You didn't kill them. Because it's sad. The vampire studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he continued walking, his boots silent on the polished stone floor. Elara hurried to keep up, very aware that she was leaving wet footprints on his pristine floors. They climbed a spiral staircase that made her dizzy, passed through corridors lined with doors that seemed to whisper as they walked by, and finally stopped in front of a room that looked almost normal. Almost. You'll stay here, he said, pushing the door open. The windows are sealed. We don't risk sunlight in occupied rooms. There's a bath through that door. Clothes in the wardrobe. They'll be too large, but they're clean. Elara stepped inside. The room was beautiful in an austere way, a large bed with dark velvet curtains, a writing desk, a fireplace that burned with steady blue flames. No candles though, just that same cold amber light. Why are you helping me? She asked, turning to face him. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame filling the space, his crimson eyes reflecting the strange light. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked uncertain. I don't know, he said finally. Perhaps because you asked. Perhaps because I'm tired of watching mortals destroy each other. He paused. Perhaps because you remind me of someone I failed to save long ago. What was your name? Elara asked. I should know the name of the monster who saved me. Something flickered across his face, pain, maybe, or old grief. Lucien, he said softly. My name is Lucien Constantine. And I'm not a monster, child. I'm simply very, very old. He stepped back into the corridor. Sleep if you can, he said. Tomorrow, we'll discuss what happens next. Whether you stay or go. Whether you want answers or simply want to forget. I can't forget, Elara whispered. I saw what they did to her. Lucien's expression hardened. No, he agreed. You can't. But you can survive it. That's what mortals do best, they survive. He closed the door quietly, leaving her alone in the strange room with its blue fire and sealed windows. Elara stood there for a long moment, still wrapped in his too large coat, still shaking. Then she walked to the bed, climbed onto it fully clothed, and finally let herself cry. Chapter 3. Questions in the dark. Elara woke to the sound of nothing and no roosters crowing. No cartwheels rattling over cobblestones. No neighbors shouting greetings through open windows. The silence was so complete, it felt like being underwater. And for a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The hanging tree, the vampire, House Constantine. She sat up slowly, her body aching from exhaustion and grief. The blue flames in the fireplace still burned with that same unnatural steadiness, casting strange shadows across the room. She was still wearing her damp dress, still wrapped in Lucien's coat. Through the sealed windows, she couldn't tell if it was day or night. A soft knock at the door made her flinch. Come in, she said, her voice hoarse. The door opened to reveal, not Lucien, but a woman. She was pale and elegant, dressed in deep burgundy silk that rustled as she moved. Her hair was black as midnight, swept up in an intricate style that would have taken Elara's mother hours to achieve. Her eyes were the same crimson as Lucien's, but warmer somehow. Less ancient. You're awake, the woman said, her voice carrying a faint accent Elara couldn't place. Good. I was beginning to worry. She carried a tray laden with food, bread, cheese, fruit, and something that smelled like soup. I'm Katerina. But Elara stared. The portrait. Lucien said you died in 16-3. Yes, I know what my brother tells mortals. Katerina set the tray on the writing desk with a wry smile. It's easier than explaining the politics of faking one's death to escape an arranged marriage. Besides, I quite like that portrait. It captures my most intimidating angle. Despite everything, Alara felt a small smile tug at her lips. Katerina noticed. There. You can still smile. That's good. She pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat with casual grace. Eat. You're mortal. You need food. And while you eat, I'll answer the questions I can see forming behind those eyes. Alara reached for the bread with shaking hands. It was still warm, soft and real and normal. She tore into it like she was starving and realized she was. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Where's Lucien? She asked between bites. Sleeping. It's midday. Sunlight turns us to ash, so we rest during the bright hours. Katerina tilted her head, studying Alara with unsettling intensity. He told me what happened in your village. I'm sorry about your mother. Alara's throat tightened. She forced herself to swallow the bread. Why did he bring me here? That, Katerina said slowly, is an excellent question. One I've been asking myself since he carried you through our doors at dawn. She leaned back in her chair. My brother doesn't involve himself with mortals. Not anymore. Not since she stopped, seemed to reconsider. He's been alone a long time. Deliberately alone. So when he appears with a human child and announces she's under house protection, it raises questions. I didn't ask for protection. You asked for help. To him, that's the same thing. Katerina's expression softened. Lucien is old, child. Older than this house. Older than most of the vampires in this territory. He remembers when mortals and immortals lived side by side with something resembling peace. Before the purges. Before the fear. Before we retreated into our houses, and you into your superstitions. Alara thought about the hanging tree. The accusations of witchcraft. The ease with which they'd killed her mother. We're not all like that. No, Katerina agreed. You're not, but enough of you are. Just as enough of us are monsters to justify your fear. She stood, smoothing her skirts. The world is complicated, and neither side wants to admit it. What happens to me now? That depends on you. And on my brother. Katerina walked to the door, then paused. A word of advice: don't trust him too quickly. Lucien is kind, in his way. But he's also ancient and dangerous and bound by laws you don't yet understand. Blood laws, house laws, oaths that can't be broken without consequences. He told me the dead belong to you, Alara said quietly. What does that mean? Katerina's expression grew serious. It means your mother's death is now a debt. By the old laws, when a mortal under our territory is unjustly killed, their blood calls to us. We can ignore it, but most choose not to. It's one of the few ways we maintain order without revealing ourselves. So he'll punish them? The magistrate and the guards? Perhaps. Or perhaps he'll demand a different price. That's for him to decide. She opened the door. Rest. Bathe. There are clothes in the wardrobe that should fit better than what you're wearing. When sunset comes, Lucien will want to speak with you. After Katerina left, Alara sat in the strange room and tried to process everything. She ate the soup rich and herbed and nothing like the thin broths her mother used to make. She bathed in water that ran hot from silver taps without any fire to heat it. She found a dress in the wardrobe, simple gray linen, but soft and well made, and changed into it. Then she explored. The room had more secrets than she'd initially noticed. The writing desk contained paper and ink of exceptional quality. The bookshelf held volumes in languages she couldn't read, their leather bindings worn smooth by centuries of handling. And in the corner, barely visible in the strange light, was a door she hadn't noticed before. She tried the handle. Locked. I wouldn't recommend that. Alara spun around. Lucien stood in the doorway, though she hadn't heard him approach. He looked different in the amber light, less forbidding, somehow, though no less dangerous. He'd changed clothes, now wearing dark trousers and a white shirt open at the collar. His dark hair was tied back, revealing the sharp angles of his face. That door leads to the catacombs, he continued. The deep places where we keep our oldest secrets. And our oldest sins. I wasn't. Yes, you were. You're curious. That's not a criticism. He stepped into the room, moving with that same fluid grace that was almost, but not quite human. Curiosity is how mortals survive in our world. Fear alone will get you killed. Alara straightened her spine. Katerina said you wanted to speak with me. I did. I do. He gestured to the chairs by the fireplace. Sit. We have much to discuss, you and I. starting with the fact that you saw something last night. Something in the square, before they hanged your mother. Alara's blood went cold. How did you? Because you didn't scream when you saw what I am. Because you begged a monster for help without hesitation. Because he leaned forward, his crimson eyes intense. Because whatever you saw was worse than me. She wanted to deny it, but she couldn't, because he was right. In the moment before they dragged her mother to the tree, she'd seen something in the magistrate's eyes. Something that moved beneath his skin like oil on water. Something that had smiled when her mother screamed. Tell me, Lucien said softly, dangerously. Tell me, what walks in your village wearing a mortal's face? And despite every instinct screaming at her to stay silent, Alara did. Chapter 4. The thing behind the ice. Lucien went very still as she spoke, not the stillness of a living person trying to listen carefully, but the absolute motionless quality of a predator that had locked onto prey. His chest didn't rise or fall. His fingers didn't twitch. Even his eyes stopped reflecting the firelight, becoming flat and depthless as obsidian. Describe it again, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The movement beneath his skin, the exact pattern. Alara rapped, her arms around herself, trying to fight off the chill that had nothing to do with temperature. It was like something swimming under the surface. When he looked at my mother, his eyes went wrong, too dark, and there were these veins, black veins spreading from his temples. Did he speak? Yes, he said. She swallowed hard, remembering. He said, this one's blood will quiet them, and his voice sounded layered, like two people speaking at once. Lucien stood abruptly and crossed to the window. Even sealed, he stared at it as if he could see through the heavy coverings to whatever lay beyond. When he spoke again, his voice was tight with something that might have been anger or fear. A hollow, he said. A mortal possessed by something that shouldn't be able to cross into this world without an invitation, without blood and ritual and deliberate weakness. What does it want? Power, chaos, suffering. He turned back to face her. Hollows are parasites from the spaces between worlds. They slip into humans through cracks, grief, rage, desperation, and wear them like suits of skin. The host is still alive, still conscious, but trapped, watching everything the hollow does through their eyes, unable to stop it. Alara felt sick. The magistrate, is he still in there? Probably. They rarely kill the host immediately. Where's the fun in that? Lucien's expression was grim. But this changes everything. If a hollow has taken root in your village, it means someone opened a door. Someone performed a summoning ritual, whether they knew what they were doing or not. My mother would never. I'm not accusing your mother. He moved closer, crouching down so they were eye level. But someone did, and they used her death as fuel. This one's blood will quiet them. The hollow was feeding the ritual. Human sacrifice strengthens the veil tear, makes it easier for others to cross. The words hit Alara like physical blows. Her mother hadn't just been murdered. She'd been used, consumed, turned into a doorway for monsters. I'm going to be sick, she whispered. Lucien moved with inhuman speed, pressing a basin into her hands just as she retched. There wasn't much in her stomach, but what came up tasted like bile and horror. He held her hair back with surprising gentleness, not speaking, just present. When she finally stopped shaking, he handed her a cloth. I'm sorry, she managed. Don't be. This is the appropriate response to learning your world is more complicated and terrible than you imagine. He set the basin aside. The question now is what we do about it. We, yes, we. He studied her face with those ancient eyes. You're bound to this now, whether you want to be or not. The hollow saw you. It knows you escaped. And if it's clever, and they usually are, it knows you came here. To House Constantine. To me. So I've put you in danger. No? You've given me information I needed. He stood, began pacing. There have been disturbances along the border territories. Mortals acting strangely. Disappearances. I thought it was the usual human cruelty. But if there's a hollow, if there's an open tear in the veil, he stopped, his jaw tightening. This could be an incursion, the beginning of something much worse. What do we do? We? He raised an eyebrow. You're a child. You do nothing. You stay here, where it's safe, where the wards keep out things that hunt in the dark. I'll return to your village and know. Alara stood, surprised by the strength in her own voice. You can't go back there. The hollow knows you're a vampire now. It'll be waiting. I'm 400 years old. I think I can handle one parasitic entity. Can you handle 20? She met his gaze. When it looked at my mother, right before they took her to the tree, I saw them in the crowd. 3 others. Maybe more. Their eyes were wrong. All of them. Lucien's expression shifted from confident to concerned. You're certain? I'm certain. He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his thigh, the first nervous gesture she'd seen him make. Multiple hollows means organized effort, a coordinated infection. That requires he stopped himself. I need to speak with my house. This is beyond my authority to handle alone. Authority? Alara frowned. You're the head of House Constantine. Katerina called you ancient. Who has more authority than you? In my house? No one. But there are laws that govern all houses. Rules we follow to maintain the balance between your world and ours. He moved to the door. Stay here. Don't leave this room. I'll return before dawn. Lucien. She said his name without thinking, and he stopped. What happens if they come here? The hollows? They won't. Our wards would burn them to ash the moment they cross the threshold. But there was something in his voice, a hesitation that made her doubt. But he looked back at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw genuine worry in his eyes. But if there are as many as you say, if they're organized enough to coordinate an incursion, they might try anyway. Suicide attacks to weaken our defenses, to test our strength. He paused. Has anyone else seen you? Besides me and Katerina? I don't think so. I slept. Then Katerina came. Then you. Good. We'll keep it that way. He opened the door, then looked back one more time. Lock this behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me or Katerina. And Alara, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. I'm sorry. About your mother. About all of this. You deserved a childhood, not a war. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him. Alara locked it as instructed, her hands shaking. Then she returned to the fireplace and stared into the blue flames, trying to process everything she'd learned. Her mother was dead. Monsters wearing human faces walked her village streets. And she was trapped in a vampire's house while something worse than vampires hunted in the dark. She thought about running, about finding a way out, fleeing to some other village, some other life. But where would she go? The hollow had seen her face. And even if she could escape, even if she could hide, what about the others? The people, still in her village, unaware that their neighbors might not be their neighbors anymore. No, she couldn't run. Her mother had been a healer. She'd taught Alara to help people, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous. So Alara would stay. She would learn, and somehow, she would help Lucien stop whatever was coming, even if it terrified her. Even if she was just a child, outside the sealed windows, something screamed high and inhuman and hungry. The blue flames flickered, and Alara realized that Lucien's wards might not be as strong as he'd promised. Chapter 5. Blood and Ward's scream came again, closer this time. Alara pressed herself against the wall farthest from the window, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. The blue flames in the fireplace guttered and dimmed, and for one terrible moment, the room plunged into near darkness. Then the door burst open. Katerina stood in the doorway, her burgundy dress, now splattered with something dark and viscous. Her crimson eyes were blazing, and her fangs were fully extended, longer than Alara had imagined possible, gleaming like ivory daggers. Come with me, she said. Now. What's happening? The wards are failing. Something's burning through them from the outside. Katerina grabbed Alara's wrist, her grip iron strong, but somehow careful not to bruise. We need to get you to the vault. It's the oldest part of the house, the strongest protection. They ran through corridors that Alara hadn't seen before, twisting deeper into the structure. More vampires appeared from doorways, some she recognized from the portraits, others completely unfamiliar. All of them looked tense, predatory, ready for violence. How many? One of them asked as they passed a man with silver hair and scars across his face. At least 7 at the north gate, Katerina replied without slowing. More circling. They're testing different entry points. Hollows? Yes. And they're not alone. Katerina's voice was tight. There's something else with them. Something that shouldn't exist outside the deep hells. They descended a spiral staircase that seemed to go down forever, the air growing colder with each step. The strange amber light was absent here, replaced by actual torches that cast dancing shadows across walls carved with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Finally, they reached a chamber at the bottom. It was circular, the walls lined with iron doors, each marked with different sigils. In the center stood a stone altar, and around it, 6 vampires were chanting in a language that made Elara's ears ring. Lucien stood among them, his hands raised, his voice carrying a resonance that seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. Blood dripped from his palms, he'd cut them open, and the droplets hung suspended in the air, glowing with an eerie red light. The vault? Katerina called out, occupied. One of the chanters replied, the woman with silver hair from the portrait. The younglings and the blood-sworn are already inside. There's no room for. The house shuddered. Somewhere above, stone cracked with a sound like thunder. Lucien's eyes snapped open, fixing on Elara. How many did you see? He demanded. In the square. How many pairs of wrong eyes? I don't know. 3, maybe 4. Think, Elara. This is important. Were any of them watching you specifically? She tried to remember through the fog of grief and terror. The crowd. Her mother on the rope. The magistrate's black veined face. And then, yes, she whispered, there was a woman, standing apart from the others. She was staring at me the whole time. Even when everyone else was watching my mother, she was looking at me. Lucien cursed in a language she didn't understand. They marked her. That's how they found us so quickly. He turned to Katerina. We need to break the connection. Blood to blood. It's the only way to sever a hollow's tracking thread. You can't be serious, Katerina said. She's a child. The ritual could kill her. The hollows will definitely kill her. Another violent shudder ran through the house. Chunks of stone fell from the ceiling. We're out of time. Either we do this, or we evacuate and leave House Constantine to burn. Then we evacuate and lead them straight to House Valerian. House Dracos. How many vampires have to die before you admit this is bigger than one mortal child? The silver-haired woman's voice was cold. Break the connection. Seal the wards. Or let her go. Elara felt all eyes turn to her. A dozen predators, ancient and powerful, waiting to see if she'd run, if she'd beg for mercy, if she'd break. What do I have to do? She asked. Lucien's expression softened for just a moment. Then he was all business again, crossing to her in 3 long strides. The ritual requires a willing exchange. Your blood calls to them, they've marked you as prey. But if I bind your blood to mine, to House Constantine, their mark becomes useless. You become invisible to their tracking. Will it hurt? Yes. He didn't lie to her. She appreciated that. But I'll make it as quick as I can. And afterwards, you'll be under permanent house protection. No vampire in any territory will be able to harm you without answering to me. And the hollows will lose your scent. They'll still know you exist, but they won't be able to find you. Not unless you willingly return to them. The house shuddered again. Cracks spider webbed across the ceiling. One of the iron doors began to glow red hot. Decide, Katerina said urgently. Now. Elara thought about her mother. About the blue shawl fluttering in the wind. About the look in the magistrate's eyes when he'd called her a witch. About the fact that running had never been her mother's way. Healing was. Helping was. Even when it cost everything. Do it, she said. Lucien nodded once, then drew a silver blade from his belt. Katerina, hold the circle. Victor. Anastasia reinforced the north wards. Everyone else, prepare for breach. They'll push hard once they realize what we're doing. He knelt in front of Elara, bringing himself to her eye level again. Give me your hand. Palm up. She did. Her hand looked impossibly small in his, pale and fragile against his marble-cold skin. This will create a bond between us, he said quietly, so only she could hear. Not like turning you'll remain mortal. But you'll carry a piece of House Constantine in your blood. It will change you, make you stronger, give you longer life, better healing. But it will also mark you as mine in ways that can't be undone. Will I become a monster? No. But you'll walk in their world. And that's often worse. He raised the blade. Last chance to refuse. Above them, something roared. It didn't sound like any animal Elara had ever heard. It sounded like rage-given voice. Like hunger made manifest. I'm not afraid, she lied. Lucien smiled, just a little. You should be. But you're brave anyway. That's rarer than you know. Then he drew the blade across her palm. The pain was sharp and immediate, but nothing compared to the grief she'd been carrying. Blood welled up, bright red against her skin. Lucien cut his own palm. Deeper, and his blood was wrong to dark. Too thick, moving like it had a will of its own. By blood and house, and the old laws that bind all living and dead, he said, his voice taking on that resonant quality again. I claim this child as kin. Her blood is my blood. Her protection is my oath. Her enemies are my war. He pressed their bleeding palms. Together, the world exploded into light and pain, and something that felt like being unmade and remade all at once. Alara screamed, and somewhere, in the darkness behind her eyes, she felt the hollows scream back, furious, cheated, losing their prey. Then everything went black. Chapter 6. The mark of House Constantinelor awoke to silence, not the oppressive silence of the sealed room, but something deeper. A stillness that felt alive, watchful, as if the house itself were holding its breath. She was lying on something soft. A bed, she realized, but not the one from her room. This one was larger, the fabric beneath her fingers impossibly smooth. Silk, maybe, or something finer. Easy, Lucien's voice, closer than she expected. Don't try to sit up yet. The binding takes time to settle. She opened her eyes slowly. The room was dim, lit only by those blue flames she was beginning to recognize as uniquely vampire. Lucien sat in a chair beside the bed, his white shirt stained with dried blood, hers and his both. He looked exhausted in a way she hadn't thought possible for something that didn't need sleep. What happened? Her voice came out rough, like she'd been screaming for hours. You survived. He leaned forward, studying her face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable. The binding worked. The hollows lost your trail. And the house, he paused. The house wards held. Barely. Did anyone die? 2 vampires injured. 1 seriously. But no deaths. Something flickered across his expression. You're the first concern I've had for mortal welfare in a very long time. It's disconcerting. Alara managed to push herself up to sitting. Her left hand was wrapped in clean white bandages, and beneath them, she could feel a strange warmth. Not painful exactly, but present. Like a heartbeat that wasn't her own. What did you do to me? Created a blood bond. The oldest form of vampire protection. He held up his own bandaged palm. Your blood now carries a trace of mine. To any vampire in any territory, you'll register as House Constantine. Under my protection. Under my law. And to the hollows? You're invisible. They can still hurt you if they find you, but they can't track you anymore. The thread they attached to you in the square, I severed it. He stood, moved to the window. They weren't pleased. We could hear them screaming for miles. Alara touched the bandages carefully. You said it would change me, make me stronger. It will. Over time, you'll heal faster than normal mortals. Live longer. Your senses will sharpen, not to vampire levels, but enough to notice things others miss. And he hesitated. You'll feel me when I'm near, when I'm in danger. It goes both ways. The bond connects us, so you'll always know where I am. Yes. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I won't lie to you about what this means. You're bound to me now in ways that most mortals would consider slavery. I could command you, compel you, use the bond to control your actions. Other vampires have. It's not uncommon. Fear spiked through her. Will you? No, the word was absolute. The bond gives me the ability. It doesn't require me to use it. You're under my protection, Alara, not my control. There's a difference, even if other houses don't always honor it. She wanted to believe him. But she was 8 years old, and alone, and marked by monsters, and trust felt like a luxury she couldn't afford. Can it be broken? Something pained crossed his face. Only by death. Mine or yours? He sat back down in the chair, suddenly looking his true age. I'm sorry. I should have warned you more clearly before we began. But there wasn't time, and the alternative was letting the hollows tear you apart. I know, and she did. She'd seen what was coming for them, heard the screaming, felt the house shake under the assault. Thank you for saving me. Again, you shouldn't have to thank someone for basic decency. He rubbed his face, a very human gesture. Katerina was right. I've been alone too long. I've forgotten how to protect without possessing, how to help without claiming. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Alara asked the question that had been building since she woke. What happens now? Now? Lucien leaned back, his crimson eyes catching the blue firelight. Now you rest, you heal, and I figure out how an entire village became infested with hollows without any of the border houses noticing. His jaw tightened. Someone opened that veil tear deliberately. Someone with knowledge and power. And they're still out there. Will you go back? To the village? Eventually. When I have more information. When I understand what we're facing. He looked at her, but not alone. The houses are convening an emergency council. When a veiled tear opens in vampire territory, it's everyone's problem. Because the hollows will spread. Because the hollows are just the beginning. If the tear isn't sealed properly, other things will come through. Worse things. He stood again, too restless to sit still. There are entities in the spaces between worlds that make vampires look like house cats. Things that eat souls instead of blood. Things that can't be killed, only contained. The way he said it with a knowledge born from experience made Alara's skin crawl. You've fought them before. Once, 200 years ago. It took 3 houses working together and the sacrifice of 17 vampires to seal the breach. His expression was distant, haunted. I still hear their screams sometimes. The ones who let themselves be dragged through to buy us time to close the tear. Alara thought about her mother, about sacrifice, about the price people paid to protect others. I want to help, she said. Lucien looked at her like she'd grown a second head. Absolutely not. You said the bond goes both ways. That I'd feel when you're in danger. That doesn't mean it means I'm connected to this now whether you want me to be or not. She met his gaze, trying to channel every ounce of her mother's stubborn determination. The hollows killed my mother, used her blood to feed whatever ritual opened that tear. I'm not just going to hide here while you figure out how to stop them. You're a child. I'm a child who survived a hollow attack, who saw them before any of your vampires did, who can walk in daylight while you sleep. She pushed the blankets aside, standing on shaky legs. I can help. I know my village. I know the people. I know who was acting strange before my mother died. Lucien stared at her for a long moment. Then, despite everything, he laughed, a short, sharp sound that held more surprise than humor. You're absolutely insufferable, he said. Has anyone ever told you that? My mother used to say I had more courage than sense. She was right. He crossed his arms, studying her with something that might have been respect. Fine, but if you're going to involve yourself in vampire business, you need to understand our world, our laws, our politics. The houses don't cooperate easily, and when they do, it's usually because something worse than their mutual hatred has appeared. Like a veil tear, like a veil tear. He moved toward the door. Rest today. Tomorrow night, I'll start teaching you about houses, about the blood courts, about the things that hunt in the spaces between. He paused at the threshold. And Alara, thank you. For what? For reminding me why immortality matters, why we maintain the boundaries, why we fight. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. It's easy to forget, after centuries. Easy to stop caring about the mortal world when everyone you loved has turned to dust. But you, he shook his head. You make me remember. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the blue flames and the strange new warmth pulsing beneath her bandaged palm. Alara touched the bandages again, feeling the echo of Lucien's heartbeat, or whatever vampires had instead of heartbeats thrumming. Alongside her own, she was marked, now, changed, bound to a world of darkness and ancient laws, but she was also alive, protected, and determined to make her mother's death mean something, even if it terrified her, even if she had no idea what she was doing. The blue flames flickered, and somewhere in their dancing light, Alara could have sworn she saw her mother's face, proud, sad, and eternally gone. Chapter 7. Lessons in Blood and Shadow. 3 nights passed before Alara saw Lucien again. Katerina visited daily, bringing food and clean clothes and quiet conversation that didn't require Alara to pretend she was fine. The other vampires of House Constantine kept their distance, though she sometimes caught them watching her from doorways, curious, wary, assessing this mortal child who carried their master's blood. On the 4th night, Lucien appeared in her doorway just after sunset. Come, he said simply. Your education begins. She followed him through corridors she was beginning to recognize, down staircases that spiraled in directions that shouldn't be architecturally possible, until they reached a room she'd never seen before. It was vast and circular, the walls lined floor to ceiling with books, not dozens, thousands. The smell of old leather and ancient paper filled the air. This is the archive, Lucien said, his voice carrying a reverence she hadn't heard from him before. Every house has one. We record everything: treaties, blood feuds, rituals, histories. Knowledge is power when you live forever. He led her to a table near the center, where several books lay open, their pages covered in elegant script and detailed illustrations. Maps of territories marked in red, Genealogies of vampire bloodlines stretching back centuries. Diagrams of creatures that shouldn't exist. Sit, he instructed, and she did. Lucien remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back, like a professor beginning a lecture. Before you can understand what's happening in your village, you need to understand us. What we are, what we're not, and why the balance between our worlds matters. I thought vampires were just monsters, things that drink blood and burn in sunlight. We are. But we're also so much more than that. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Vampires aren't born, we're made. A human dies with vampire blood in their system. And if the blood is strong enough, if they have the will to survive, they wake up changed, stronger, faster, immortal, but no longer entirely human. What do you lose when you change? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for a moment before answering. Daylight, the ability to create life. Food tastes like ash, water like poison. We can only sustain ourselves on blood. His crimson eyes met hers. But we also lose something less tangible. The sense of time passing. The urgency that makes mortal lives meaningful. After your first century, years blur together. After your third, you start forgetting what it felt like to be human at all. Is that why you helped me? Because I reminded you? Perhaps. He opened one of the books, revealing an illustration of a vampire feeding from a willing mortal. But there are rules, laws that govern how we interact with your world. The most important is consent. A vampire cannot feed from an unwilling mortal without consequence. What kind of consequence? Blood madness. The victim's fear and pain poison the blood, and over time, it corrupts the vampire who consumed it. They become feral, mindless. We call them the Forsaken. He turned the page, showing an image that made Alara's stomach turn, a creature that barely looked humanoid anymore, all twisted limbs and too many teeth. Every house hunts Forsaken on sight. They're a threat to vampire and mortal alike. So vampires need permission to drink blood? From mortals, yes. There are exceptions, blood oaths, which we'll discuss later, but generally, consent is paramount. It's why houses maintain blood sworn. Mortals who willingly provide blood in exchange for protection and long life. Alara thought about that. The people in your vault, the younglings and blood sworn, those are mortals who chose to join House Constantine. Some, others are vampires too young to fight. Lucien leaned back. House Constantine has 43 vampires and 27 blood-sworn mortals. We're smaller than some houses, larger than others. But we hold territory on the eastern border, which makes us strategically important because of the veil. Because our territory sits on thin places, spots where the barrier between worlds is naturally weaker. Most houses avoid them. We guard them. Pride edged into his voice. For 300 years, House Constantine has maintained the eastern border without a single breach. Until now, the weight of that failure hung in the air between them. Tell me about the other houses, Alara said, trying to move past the heavy moment. Lucien nodded, grateful for the redirect. There are 7 major houses in this region. Constantine holds the east. Valerian controls the north, their scholars and diplomats. Dracos commands the south, warriors and hunters. Mordain holds the west, the oldest house, the most traditional. He pointed to different sections of the map. Then there are the minor houses, Ashford, Corvinus, Thorn. They hold smaller territories and usually align with one of the major houses for protection, and they all hate each other. Not hate, more like complicated family dynamics stretched over centuries. Old grudges, ancient betrayals, blood feuds that started before your great-great-grandparents were born. He smiled without humor. Immortality gives you a very long memory for insults, but they'll work together? For the veil tear? They'll have to. If the breach spreads beyond Constantine territory, it becomes everyone's problem. Self-interest is a powerful motivator. He closed the book and pulled another toward them. But that brings us to the second lesson, politics. For the next several hours, Lucien walked her through the intricate web of vampire society. How treaties were signed in blood. How disputes were settled in formal duels. How the Council of Houses convened only in times of crisis, each house sending their eldest vampire as representative. The council meets in 3 nights, he said. At the neutral ground, the ossuary, we call it. A place where no house holds power. Where all blood feuds are suspended. Will you take me? Absolutely not, but Alara. His voice was firm. You're under my protection. But you're also mortal and a child. The council would see you as a liability. Or worse, an opportunity. There are vampires who would use you against me, who would threaten you to force my hand on decisions. Then why tell me any of this? Why teach me if I'm just supposed to hide? Because knowledge is the only weapon you have that can't be taken from you. He reached across the table and gently touched her bandaged hand. The bond protects your body, but your mind, your ability to understand and navigate this world, that's something you have to cultivate yourself. The touch sent a strange warmth up her arm. The bond, she realized. She could feel his presence now, like a steady flame at the edge of her consciousness. I can feel you, she said softly. Like you said, it's strange. You'll get used to it. Over time, you'll learn to read the bond more clearly, to sense when I'm near, when I'm in pain, when I'm— He stopped abruptly, pulling his hand back. When you're what? Feeding. He wouldn't meet her eyes. The bond carries everything, Alara. Hunger, pain, pleasure. It's invasive in ways I should have warned you about more thoroughly. Heat crept up her neck. She was 8, but she understood the implication. Can I block it? With practice. Yes. I'll teach you. He stood, moving to the window. But first, you need to understand what we're facing. The hollows, the veil tear, and why someone would open one deliberately. You think it was intentional? I'm certain of it. Veil tears don't just happen. They require ritual, sacrifice, and knowledge that most mortals don't possess. He turned back to face her, his expression grave. Someone in your village knew exactly what they were doing. Someone summoned those hollows, and they used your mother's death as the final key to tear the veil wide open. Alara's hands clenched into fists. Who would do that? That's what we need to find out. Before the council meets. Before the other houses decide. House Constantine is too weak to hold the eastern border. His jaw tightened. If they strip our territory, the thin places become unguarded. And if that happens, more tears will open. More hollows will cross. Eventually, something worse. Then we go back to my village. We find whoever did this. You can't go during the day, but I can. She stood, meeting his gaze with all the determination she could muster. You said I can walk in sunlight while you sleep. That makes me useful. It makes you vulnerable. I'm already vulnerable. At least this way, I'm vulnerable in helping. Lucien studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he smiled, a real smile, not the sardonic twist she'd seen before. Your mother raised a warrior, he said quietly. She'd be proud of you. Tears stung Alara's eyes, but she blinked them back. When do we leave? Tomorrow night, after sunset. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Alara, when we return to your village, stay close to me. The hollows may not be able to track you anymore, but they remember your face. And they're patient hunters. After he left, Alara remained in the archive, staring at the maps and diagrams spread across the table. Somewhere in her village, something wearing human skin was waiting, and in 3 nights, the vampire houses would decide the fate of them all. She touched her bandaged palm, feeling Lucien's presence through the bond, steady, ancient, and somehow reassuring. She wasn't alone anymore. For better or worse, she was bound to this war now. Chapter 8. Return to Ash and Shadows. The left House Constantine an hour after sunset. When the sky was still bruised purple at the edges, Lucien had insisted Alara wear darker clothes, practical trousers, and a tunic that Katerina had found somewhere, along with a cloak that was too long, but kept the night chill at bay. He'd also given her a small knife in a leather sheath. I don't know how to use this, she'd said. Then don't. It's for emergencies only. If something gets past me, you run. The knife is just insurance. His expression had been grave. Promise me, Alara. If I tell you to run, you run. You don't look back. You don't try to help. You survive, she'd promised, though she wasn't sure she could keep it. Now they moved through the forest in silence. Lucien traveled with an ease that made the darkness irrelevant. He never stumbled, never hesitated, moving between trees like flowing water. Alara struggled to keep up, her human eyes straining to see obstacles he avoided without conscious thought. Here, he stopped suddenly, reaching back to take her hand. The contact sent warmth through the bond, and suddenly the darkness didn't seem quite so absolute. Let me guide you. Trust the bond. She did. And somehow, with his hand in hers and that steady presence at the edge of her mind, walking became easier. She could almost sense the roots before she tripped over them, feel the low branches before they caught her hair. Is this what it's like for you? She asked softly. Always seeing in the dark? This is what it's like for me to see you seeing through the bond. His voice held a note of wonder. I've never shared it with someone so young. Your perception is different, sharper in some ways. You notice details I've learned to ignore over centuries. They walked in companionable silence after that, the forest gradually giving way to farmland. She recognized. Her village lay ahead, a dark cluster of buildings against the lighter sky. No lights burned in windows. No smoke rose from chimneys. Something's wrong, Alara whispered. I know. Lucien's grip on her hand tightened. Stay close. Keep the bond open. If I feel anything wrong, if anything makes you afraid, I'll know. They approached from the eastern edge, where the forest met the village proper. The first house they reached belonged to the baker, a kind man who'd always given Alara day-old bread when her mother's coin ran short. The door hung open. Inside, furniture was overturned. Flowers spread across the floor in drifts like snow. And painted on the wall in something dark, blood, Lucien said quietly. 3 days old, maybe 4. He knelt, touching the edge of the stain with careful fingers. Human, but wrong, tainted. Hollow blood? Blood from someone, a hollow fed from. He stood, his expression grim. They're marking territory, claiming the village as theirs. They moved deeper into the village, finding more of the same. Doors open, houses ransacked, blood signs on walls, but no bodies, no people at all. Where is everyone? Alara's voice shook. These were her neighbors, the people she'd grown up with. Did the hollows know? Lucien stopped in the center of the square, his head tilted as if listening to something she couldn't hear. If they'd killed everyone, we'd smell it. Death has a very specific scent. This is something else. The hanging tree still stood where it had always been, but her mother's body was gone. Someone had cut her down, at least. Small mercy. The church, Alara said suddenly. When there's danger, everyone goes to the church. It's the strongest building in the village. Lucien nodded. Show me. The church sat at the far end of the square, its stone walls thick and old. As they approached, Alara could see candlelight flickering through the stained glass windows. Shadows moved inside human shapes. She hoped desperately. The church door was barricaded from within. Lucien could have torn it down easily, but instead he knocked 3 measured strikes that echoed in the empty square. Silence. Then whispers inside. Frightened voices arguing. Please, Alara called out. It's Alara, Thomas's daughter. I've come back. More whispers. Then a voice she recognized, Father Benedict, the old priest who'd baptized her as an infant. Alara died with her mother. The magistrate said so. Said she was taken by demons. I'm not dead. I'm right here. Please, Father, let me in. If you're truly alive, child, then you've brought those demons with you. The priest's voice cracked with fear. We've seen them. The ones with wrong eyes. They came looking for you. Tore through houses, searching. They said you belonged to them. Lucien's hand found her shoulder, steadying. Tell him you're under House Constantine's protection, he said quietly. Tell him the blood laws apply. Alara raised her voice. I'm protected by House Constantine, by vampire law. The hollows can't claim me. The whispers inside turned frantic. Then a different voice, younger, male. The blacksmith's son. You're with monsters? You brought vampires to our village? The monsters were already here. Alara's frustration boiled over. The magistrate, the woman who watched my mother die. They're hollows, things from beyond the veil, wearing human skin. They killed my mother and used her blood to open a door for more of their kind. And you, her voice broke. You let them. You stood there and watched and did nothing. Silence, heavy and damning. Finally, Father Benedict spoke again. The magistrate left 2 days ago. Took 20 villagers with him. Said they were going to petition the capital for help. But we saw their eyes before they left. Saw the black veins. They weren't human anymore. Lucien cursed under his breath. 20 hollows. Moving toward a populated city. That's an infestation in progress. What do we do? Alara asked. We need to know where they went. Which direction? How long ago? He moved closer to the church door. Father Benedict. I am Lucien Constantine, master of the Eastern House. I hold these lands by ancient treaty and blood. Right. The creatures hunting your village answer to me now. But I need information. Why should we trust you? Because your only other option is to hide in that church until you starve or the hollows return. And they will return. His voice carried absolute certainty. They marked this village. It belongs to them now. Unless I reclaim it, more whispered arguments. Then the sound of furniture being dragged aside. The door opened a crack, revealing Father Benedict's weathered face. Behind him, Alara could see dozens of villagers huddled in the pews, men, women, children, all looking half-starved and terrified. The priest's eyes went to Lucien, widening at the sight of him. Then to Alara, and she saw recognition, relief, and then horror as he noticed her holding the vampire's hand. "Child," he whispered. "What have you done?" "I survived," she said simply. "My mother died. I survived. And now I'm going to stop the things that killed her." She stepped into the church, pulling Lucien with her. The villagers shrank back, pressing against the walls. Several made warding signs. One woman fainted, but Alara held her ground, held Lucien's hand, and felt the bond between them pulse with shared determination. "Tell us everything," she said. When the magistrate left, which road he took, who went with him, every detail you remember. Father Benedict looked from her to Lucien and back again. Then slowly, he began to speak. Outside, thunder rumbled in a cloudless sky, and in the shadows beyond the candlelight, something laughed, a sound with too many voices layered over each other, speaking in perfect, horrible unison. The hollows hadn't left after all. They'd been waiting. Lucien's hand tightened on Alara's, and through the bond, she felt his recognition, his calculation, his cold fury. "Get them to the back of the church," he said quietly. "Behind the altar. The old stones there are consecrated. It'll give you some protection. What about you?" "I'm going to teach these things why House Constantine has held the eastern border for 300 years. His crimson eyes began to glow brighter, and his fangs extended fully. "And Alara, remember your promise. If I tell you to run, I run." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "I know," he smiled, fierce and predatory, and somehow still reassuring. "Good girl." Then he turned toward the door as the first hollow stepped into the candlelight, wearing the magistrate's face like a poorly fitted mask, and the night exploded into violence. Chapter 9. Blood and consecrated ground. The thing wearing the magistrate's face smiled, and its mouth opened wide, revealing teeth that belonged to no human creature. "Little lost lamb," it said in that layered voice. "You should have stayed hidden." Lucien moved. Alara had seen him move before, quick, fluid, unnaturally fast. But this was different. This was violence distilled to its purest form. He crossed the distance between them faster than thought, his hand closing around the hollow's throat before it could react. "This is consecrated ground," Lucien said, his voice cold as winter death. "You shouldn't be able to cross the threshold." The hollow laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Old rules. Broken rules. The veil is thin here now, torn. We go where we please." Lucien's grip tightened, and Alara heard bone crack. But the hollow didn't scream. It just kept smiling with the magistrate's ruined face. "Father Benedict," Alara called, not taking her eyes off the struggle. "Get everyone to the altar, now." The priest hesitated only a moment before shepherding the terrified villagers deeper into the church. Children cried. Women prayed. Men clutched whatever makeshift weapons they'd managed to gather: farming tools, fireplace pokers, the blacksmith's hammer. More shadows gathered in the doorway. 3, 5, 7. Hollows wearing familiar faces: the baker, the tavern keeper, the seamstress who'd made Alara's Sunday dress. All with those wrong eyes, those black veins spreading like infection beneath their skin. "You're outnumbered, old vampire," the magistrate thing rasped. "Surrender the child. She belongs to us. We marked her first. She belongs to House Constantine." Lucien twisted, and there was a wet, tearing sound as the magistrate's head came free from its body. The hollow collapsed, black ichor spreading across the church floor instead of blood. "Your mark is broken. She's mine now." The remaining hollows hissed in unison, their bodies beginning to contort in ways that made Alara's eyes hurt. Joints bent backward, limbs elongated. The human disguises were slipping, revealing the things beneath: creatures made of shadow and hunger and ancient malice. "Alara," Lucien said, not looking at her. "The bond. Open it completely. Trust me." She didn't understand, but she did as he asked. She let down whatever mental walls she'd unconsciously built and felt his presence flood through her, cold, ancient, powerful, and utterly focused. And suddenly, she could see what he saw. The hollows weren't just standing in the doorway. They were everywhere, crawling on the walls, clinging to the ceiling. Dozens of them, maybe more, all connected by threads of darkness that pulsed like veins. They were a hive, she realized. A collective entity wearing multiple bodies, the consecrated stones, she gasped. They're not strong enough. There are too many. I know. Through the bond, she felt his calculation, his strategy. But they have a weakness. All hive entities do. Find the prime host, the first one infected, and kill it. The rest destabilize. How do we find? You already did. His voice was grim. Your mother. They used her death as the anchor. Her blood opened the tear. Her body is the doorway they keep coming through. Horror and rage twisted in Alar's stomach. Where is she? Feel for the cold spot. The place where the veil is thinnest. He moved backward, forcing the hollows to follow, drawing them away from where the villagers huddled. Use the bond. You can sense thin places now. It's part of what I gave you. Alara closed her eyes, letting her awareness expand through the church. The villagers were warm spots of fear and faith. Lucien burned like a cold star. The hollows were voids, absences of life that hurt to perceive, and beneath the church, the crypt, she whispered. There's a crypt beneath the altar. That's where they put her. Go. Lucien's command was absolute. Seal the doorway. Burn the body if you have to. Just close the tear. I can't leave you, you're not leaving me. You're ending this. Go. A hollow lunged at him, and Lucien caught it midair, his fangs sinking into its throat. The creature shrieked not in pain but in fury as he tore out whatever passed for its essence. Black ichor sprayed across the pews. Alara ran. She pushed through the frightened villagers, ignoring their grasping hands and desperate pleas. Father Benedict tried to stop her, but she ducked under his reaching arms and made for the small door behind the altar, the entrance to the crypt where the village's dead had been laid to rest for generations. The door was locked, but the wood was old. She threw her weight against it once, twice, and on the third impact, it splintered inward. The stairs beyond descended into absolute darkness. No candles, no light, just cold air that smelled of earth and decay and something worse. Something that made her skin crawl. She pulled out the small knife Lucien had given her. It wouldn't do much against hollows, but holding it made her feel slightly less helpless. The stairs seemed to go on forever. Down and down into the earth, the walls pressing closer with each step. She could hear things moving in the darkness, whispers in languages that predated human speech. Then the stairs ended, opening into a chamber she'd never seen before. Her mother's body lay on a stone bier in the center, still wearing the blue shawl. But the body was wrong. The skin was too gray, the veins too visible and too black. And around her, carved into the floor in what looked like dried blood, was a circle of symbols that hurt Alar's eyes to look at directly. The tear in the veil. It wasn't visible, not exactly. But Alara could feel it, a wrongness in the air, a place where reality was too thin, where things from outside pressed against the boundary between worlds. You shouldn't have come here, little lamb. Alara spun. A woman stood at the base of the stairs, the same woman who'd watched her in the square, the one who'd marked her. But unlike the others, this one's human disguise was perfect. No wrong eyes, no black veins, just a beautiful woman, with pale skin and a smile that never reached her eyes. You're not a hollow, Alara said, her grip tightening on the knife. No, I'm the one who opened the door for them. The woman stepped closer, and Alara realized with dawning horror that she knew this face. Knew this voice. Did you really think your mother died by accident? That her healing was innocent? Magistrate's daughter. The words fell from Alara's lips like stones. You were supposed to be sick, dying. I was dying. Your mother's herbs would have saved me, but I didn't want to be saved. I wanted power. The woman gestured to the symbols on the floor. I needed a death, a sacrifice, someone pure and kind and loved. Your mother was perfect. Rage burned through Alara, white hot and absolute. You murdered her. You made them call her a witch. I opened a door. And now the hollows serve me. 23 bodies walking, all under my control. An army of shadows. The woman's smile widened. And when I'm done with this pathetic village, I'll move on to the cities, the capitals. I'll fill this world with my children until there's no light left anywhere. Alara felt something shift in the bond. Lucien's presence, urgent and fierce. He'd heard through their connection. He was coming, but he wouldn't make it in time. The woman raised her hand, and the symbols on the floor began to glow with sickly green light. The tear in the veil widened. Alara could see things moving on the other side now, shapes that were too wrong to fully comprehend. Watch, the woman said. Watch as I bring them through. Watch as your world ends. Alara looked at her mother's body. At the blue shawl she'd woven with her own hands. At the woman who'd killed her for nothing more than ambition and spite. And she remembered what Lucien had taught her in the archive. About vampire law. About blood bonds. About the fact that her blood now carried House Constantine's mark. She didn't hesitate. She raised the knife and cut her palm, the same palm Lucien had cut, opening the wound that had barely begun to heal. Her blood, mixed with his, dripped onto the floor, onto the symbols, onto the tear. The effect was immediate. The green light sputtered and died. The tear shuddered, and the woman screamed a sound of pure fury. "What have you done?" "Consecrated it." Alara's voice was steady despite her trembling hands. "My blood carries vampire protection. Old magic. Older than your tear. And it rejects you." The symbols began to crack, breaking apart like dried clay. The woman lunged at Alara, her perfect disguise finally slipping to reveal something monstrous beneath. But Lucien was there. He caught the woman mid-leap, slamming her into the stone wall with enough force to crack it. His fangs were bared, his eyes blazing with cold fury. "You opened a veil tear in my territory," he said, his voice echoing with centuries of authority. "You killed innocents. You corrupted my border." He leaned closer and the woman whimpered. "House Constantine has held the eastern threshold for 300 years. We do not tolerate breaches. Please, you should have thought of that before you murdered a healer to feed your ambition." He tore her throat out in one savage motion. The woman collapsed. And as she died, Alara felt it through the bond, every hollow connected to her. Every shadow thing she'd brought through. Destabilizing, dissolving, returning to whatever hell had spawned them. Upstairs, she could hear the villagers' screams turn to gasps of relief. Lucien turned to her, his expression softening as he saw her bleeding hand. "You saved us all," he said quietly. "That was incredibly brave. And incredibly reckless. You said to close the tear. I didn't mean by bleeding on it. It worked, didn't it?" Despite everything, he smiled. "Yes, it worked." He moved to her mother's body, gently straightening the blue shawl. "She deserves better than this. A proper burial. With honor." Alara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Together, they climbed back up the stairs, leaving the broken tear and the dead woman behind. The battle was over, but Alara knew, somehow, that the war had only just begun. Chapter 10, Dawn and Decisions. They buried her mother at sunrise. The entire village gathered at the edge of the forest, where wildflowers grew thick, and the old trees stood like silent witnesses. Father Benedict spoke words about mercy and forgiveness and the grace of the departed, but Alara barely heard them. She stood beside the grave, wrapped in the blue shawl that still smelled faintly of herbs and home, and said her own silent goodbye. Lucien waited at the tree line, where the shadows were deep enough to protect him from the growing light. He couldn't come closer, the sun was too strong, even filtered through branches, but she felt his presence through the bond, steady, patient, giving her space to grieve. When the last of the earth had been placed over her mother's grave, the villagers began to disperse. Some approached Alara with awkward condolences. Others avoided her gaze entirely, unable to reconcile the child they'd known with the girl who'd walked into darkness and returned marked by monsters. Father Benedict was the last to leave. He placed a weathered hand on her shoulder and said, "Your mother would be proud of your courage. Even if she might question your choices. She taught me to help people," Alara said softly. "Even when it's dangerous. I'm just doing what she would have done." The priest's expression was complicated, pride and sorrow and fear all mixed together. "The vampire. Will he demand payment? For saving us? House Constantine doesn't work that way. The blood laws demand justice, not tribute." Alara met his eyes. "You're safe, father. The tear is sealed. The hollows are gone. Lucien will ensure the border stays protected. And you? Will you stay with them? With him?" It was the question she'd been avoiding, the one that had circled in her mind all through the dark hours after the battle, as they'd carried her mother's body up from the crypt and prepared it for burial. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't go back to the life I had before. That girl died with her mother. But I don't know what comes next." Father Benedict squeezed her shoulder gently, then walked away, leaving her alone with the grave and the distant vampire who'd saved her life twice over. Alara knelt in the grass and placed her hand flat against the fresh earth. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you," she whispered. "I'm sorry I was too small, too weak, too late." Tears finally came, hot and heavy. "But I stopped them, Mama. I closed the door. They opened with your blood. And I'll make sure no one else dies the way you did." I promise. The wind stirred the wildflowers, and for just a moment, Elara could have sworn she smelled herbs and honey, her mother's scent. Then Lucien was there beside her, his coat thrown over his head to shield him from the scattered sunlight. Smoke rose from where the light touched his exposed hand. But he didn't flinch. "You're burning," she said, alarmed. "It's worth it." He knelt beside her, his crimson eyes softer than she'd ever seen them. "I wanted to pay my respects." She raised someone extraordinary. "You can't stay out here. The sun will kill me in about 10 minutes, yes." He looked at the grave, his ancient face thoughtful. "Your mother died protecting you from a threat she didn't understand. She was brave. That's worth remembering." They stayed there together as the sun climbed higher, until Lucien's skin began to blister and Elara forcibly pulled him back into the shadows. He let her lead him to the church, down into the crypt that was now just a crypt again, empty of tears and hollows and horror. She helped him settle against the cool stone wall, her hands gentle as she examined the burns on his skin. They were already healing, the vampire blood, knitting flesh back together within human speed. "Why did you do that?" she asked. "Risk yourself like that?" "Because grief matters. Because honoring the dead matters. Because," he paused, searching for words, "because I've lived so long that I'd forgotten." "You reminded me. The council meets tonight," Elara said, changing the subject before the emotion overwhelmed her. "Will they be angry? About the tear? About me?" "Probably." Lucien's expression turned dry. "House Constantine has never been conventional. Bringing a mortal child into our world, creating a blood bond with her, letting her help seal a veiled tear, it's all highly irregular. Will they try to take me away from you?" "They can try." His voice carried absolute certainty. "They won't succeed. You're mine now, Elara, under my protection, bound by blood and house law. No vampire in any territory can touch you without answering to me. But I'm still mortal, still human." "Yes, and you'll stay that way unless you choose otherwise." He met her gaze seriously. "I need you to understand something. The bond I gave you will extend your life. You'll live longer than normal mortals, heal faster, age slower. But you'll still age, still die eventually. And when that day comes, you'll have a choice. To become like you, to become vampire. Yes, the bond makes the transformation easier, safer. But it has to be your choice. I will never force it on you." He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a surprisingly gentle gesture. "You can live your mortal life and leave this world behind. Find a husband, have children, grow old. I'll protect you until your last breath, and when you die, you'll be free of all of this. Or you can stay, learn, become part of House Constantine properly. And when you're old enough, when you've lived enough of a mortal life to make an informed choice, you can ask me to turn you, to make you immortal." His expression was carefully neutral. "But that's a decision for years from now. Decades, maybe. Right now, you're a child who deserves to be a child." Elara thought about it. About mortality and immortality. About the life her mother had wanted for her, quiet, safe, normal. And about the life she'd glimpsed in the past few days, dangerous, strange, but somehow more vivid than anything she'd known before. "I want to stay," she said finally. "At least for now. I want to learn. To understand this world, to help protect the borders like you do. It won't be easy. The other houses will test you. Some vampires won't accept a mortal under house protection. And there will be more threats, more tears, more creatures, more battles. I know." She touched the bandage on her palm, feeling the warmth of their bond. "But I'm not afraid anymore. Not of the dark. Not of monsters. Not even of what I might become." Lucien studied her for a long moment. Then he smiled, a real smile, warm and proud and tinged with something that might have been hope. "Then welcome to House Constantine, Elara. Properly this time." He extended his hand, formal and ceremonial. "I'll teach you everything. How to fight, how to survive, how to walk between worlds without losing yourself. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll teach you what it means to be immortal." She took his hand, feeling the bond flare between them stronger now, more certain. A connection that would last as long as they both lived. "I have one condition," she said. "Name it." "We go back. To my village. Once a year. To visit her grave. To remember." Her voice was steady despite the grief still heavy in her chest. "I never want to forget where I came from. Who I was before all of this." "Agreed." Lucien squeezed her hand gently. "Once a year. Every year. For as long as you need." Outside, the sun climbed toward noon, painting the world in shades of gold and green. The village slowly came back to life, shops opening, children playing, neighbors talking in hushed but hopeful voices. The hollows were gone. The tear was sealed. The nightmare had ended. But for Elara, something new was beginning. She stood at the threshold between two worlds, one of sunlight and mortality, the other of shadows and eternity. And for the first time since her mother's death, she felt something other than grief. She felt purpose. She felt strength. She felt ready. "Come on," Lucien said, rising gracefully to his feet. "We should return to the house before the council convenes. You'll need proper clothes, and I should probably prepare you for what to expect when you meet the other house masters. Are they scarier than you?" "Much scarier. Especially Mordain. He's been a vampire for over 1,000 years and has absolutely no patience for mortals." Lucien's eyes glinted with dark humor. "He's going to hate you on principle." "Good," Elara said, surprising herself. "Let him hate me. I stopped a veil tear and saved a village. If he wants to complain about it, he can take it up with me directly." Lucien laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed through the empty crypt. "Oh, you're going to be trouble, aren't you?" "Probably." "Excellent." He offered his arm like a gentleman escorting a lady. "House Constantine has always preferred trouble to boredom. I think you'll fit in perfectly." They climbed the stairs together, leaving the darkness behind and emerging into the church, where sunlight streamed through stained glass, painting the floor in jeweled colors. Elara paused at the threshold, looking back one last time at the crypt where her mother had been used as a doorway for monsters, where she'd bled on ancient symbols and sealed a tear in reality, where her childhood had ended and something else had begun. Then she turned forward, toward the light, toward Lucien, toward whatever came next. Her mother was gone, but her mother's courage lived on, and Elara would carry it into the darkness, again and again, for as long as she drew breath. Mortal or immortal, human or something more, she would be brave, she would be strong, she would be enough. The blue shawl fluttered around her shoulders as she stepped into the sunlight, and somewhere in the warmth, she felt her mother's blessing. "Go." The wind seemed to whisper, "Live, fight, become who you were meant to be." And Elara did. The end.